The whole event is live streamed on YouTube, and I'm going to start recording. Right? Let me see. All right. Everybody, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We are talking to you from the Netherlands, but our speaker today is in India. He is from India, but he lives in the Netherlands, but today he's in India. But we are going to listen to Trivik Verma today, who is going to talk to us about just data and the promises of the smart city, right? And Trivik also has a lot of super interesting work in the Faculty of Technology Management and Policy, right? TPM, that he will talk to us about. My name is Roberto Rocco. I'm an associate professor of spatial planning at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and I'm the host for tonight. Before I give the floor to Trivik, let me just explain to you a few things. This is an autumn school. We wanted to call it summer school, but it's not summer anymore. It's an autumn school that wants to understand the transition to sustainability that we need to have. But we want to understand this transition from a justice perspective. And why is that important? Let me share my screen with you, and then I can explain a little bit better. I'm not going to take a lot of your time, just very quickly going to introduce the school, and then we can start. Okay. So very recently, we had the European Union enacting a very important document called the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is partly inspired by the American Green Deal, which in the end was not approved, right, because of political differences. However, also in the United States, Joe Biden has just approved a huge package of measures that also address what I'm going to talk about today. So the European Green Deal, which is what we are more interested in, addresses this necessary transition that we must have from a fossil fuel-based economy, a carbon-based economy, towards a carbon-free based economy, a green economy, right? And in order to do that, they want to address several sectors of the economy. You can see in my slide: climate, ambition, clean energy, circular economy, building and renovating. You know that building and renovating produce a lot of pollution. Sustainable mobility from farm to fork, which is this idea that your food should come from very close by, right? Not from New Zealand or from Chile, but that your food should come from very close by in a sustainable way from local farmers and so on. Ecology and pollution. And this European Green Deal is based on two main pillars. One is financing the transition. So, you know, put your money where your mouth is. If you want to do something, you have to invest on it. And the European Union is investing 1 trillion euros in this plan. And the other one is the just transition. So that's the second pillar of that document. And what do they mean by just transition? Is that the transition to sustainability not only is urgent, but it must be fair. It must be inclusive to everybody and leave no one behind. This motto, of leave no one behind, is in the SDGs, in the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's also here, and it means that nobody should be left behind. Our history is full of transitions. Human history is full of transitions. Maybe our greatest transition was from when we were hunter-gatherers and we became agriculturalists, and that was a huge transition. But let's look at this more recent transition, the Industrial Revolution in England, which was a very important moment, not only to England, but to the world, because it spread later on. It had several consequences everywhere, but it did produce a lot of losers. It produces lots of winners, but lots of losers as well. People living in abhorrent conditions, in cramped quarters, in very dirty cities, full of, pestilence. And to be honest, that's when the first grains of modern urban planning start to emerge. It's to make our cities a little bit healthier, right? So the Industrial Revolution also produced a lot of losers. And 100 years later, we have the Industrial Revolution in England, in which, industry is going away. It's going to China, it's going to Indonesia, to India, and so on. And Europe is deindustrializing. And that too produced a lot of losers, right? People without jobs, people without, the social networks that they need to work. So that was just an example of what is a transition and why we think, and the European Union thinks, that it's important to talk about justice in the transition. And I want to make a very important point here, is that we also need to look at this transition from the point of view of the global South. And that is important because we live in a very interconnected world. The world is not Europe or the United States. We live in a much more polycentric world right now, and we need to understand what the transition means from the point of view of the global South as well, which means that we also have to look at how fair or unfair some measures are in our world, right? In our world. So without further ado, this was just a super brief introduction. We will talk about this more later on. Let me stop sharing. And I will give the word to Trivik Verma from TBM at TU Delft. Trivik, the floor is yours. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit better than I did?
Thank you, Roberto. You can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't know if I can introduce myself a bit better than that. You already introduced me really nicely, and I should stand up to it. I will try to do that. So my name is Trivik Verma. I am an assistant professor at TU Delft in the School of Technology, Policy and Management, and I am studying urban science and policy. I come from India. I've been studying in India for many years, and then I moved to the Netherlands to do my master's degree, and subsequently other things that led me to coming back to TU Delft recently and focusing on cities and data and policy from a justice perspective. I wouldn't say justice entirely, but from the perspective of understanding inequalities, and now slowly focusing on spatial justice. All thanks to Roberto, actually, because we met by chance, and then he got me introduced to spatial justice, which I found a really interesting and intense concept to study, and got involved with that pretty early on. So again, thank you for joining today. I'm really grateful that all of you are here. It's 11 o'clock in India, so please forgive me if I look a bit dizzy or disoriented and coughing, because it's been difficult for me to adjust after living abroad for a few years, and I haven't been able to come back to India recently. So that's me. Let's begin today's session. This is the session 2 of the Autumn School on Planning and Design for the Just Transition. and I'm going to talk about the role of big data in urban science and policy. It's exactly what Roberto said. I'm going to talk about just data and the smart city experiment. What we will do today is dive a bit into what data is, how it's generated, where it comes from, what its use is, focusing slowly on the smart city experiment, what that experiment means, what the condition of cities are today because of it, or aided by it. And I'm going to focus on an alternative, which might not be an alternative for many people, might be something that is used in the smart city experiment or in parallel. But I want to pose it as an alternative, which is urban science and policy, the study or the topic that I study. We will take a quick break after that, hopefully, and then do a discussion exercise in small peer groups on breakout rooms, where I will give you instructions on what to do. And feel free to ask me questions as we go along, because it's imperative that you discuss any doubts that arise in the presentation. My colleague Carissa offered. So Carissa, I would ask you, please, if there is any questions for me in the chat, please interrupt me and let me know, because I can't see everything at the same time on the screen. And
sure. I saw a raised hand. I don't know if somebody had a question.
Sure, please unmute yourself or use the chat to ask something if you have.
Yeah, if anyone has a question, please write it on the chat and we will try to answer.
Okay, so I will continue unless Carissa tells me that I need to discuss something. So what is data? We are living in exciting times right now. I talk to all my students about this every year. We're living in a data revolution where we can be a data scientist, we can be an urban planner, a policymaker, and all of these professions are slowly making use of data, or big data as it's called, simply because the world is producing a lot of data. Even a mere act of buying a book, reading it, and then I think many of us also leave reviews on Google. I don't leave reviews, so I don't know what it's called, but Google Books or something like that produces data in today's world, right? So much of data is being generated by all of our activities, walking, talking. There's always data being generated around us. So it's an exciting time for everyone to look at these different sets of data to understand human behavior and other sorts of activities and processes. And especially in my field of study, it's an exciting time for urban planners and policymakers, because they can use this to study things that have only been either theorized or conjectured about, or very difficult to understand over a long period of time through longitudinal data. This is basically a quantification of phenomena through the systemic recording of data, taking all aspects of life and turning them into data. Sometimes this happens inadvertently because of activities that we do, because of subscriptions that we might have. And sometimes this is done for a specific purpose, to actually collect data and then use it either for research or commodifying a service and so on. So some examples that I'm sure many of us are aware of are credit transactions, public transit data in many various forms across the globe, tweets, Facebook likes, Spotify songs, etc. There's so much more that this slide would be full of different kinds of examples. This is the massive data revolution that we are living in that I'm talking about, and abundance of data exists everywhere around us. It also has certain implications. So first of all, it might not be that all this data is generated to understand human behavior, but it has given researchers and companies and organizations a lot to start looking into human behavior at large scale, to understand how societies organize, how systems organize, how organizations also work, and to understand this at a very broad scale, but also at the same time to understand this very deeply, maybe on a personal or local level. There are opportunities also that arise for optimization of systems, industrial systems, Internet of Things. New buzzwords are coming up every day, planning different kinds of systems around the world that can be done quite easily when you have access to this data, because you can study the performance of a system and then optimize that for a different direction or value that you envision for it. But of course, with this comes a lot of issues with representation, privacy, not including people or communities, selection bias, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of implications also of this massive inadvertent data revolution around the world. Why is this happening now? So as you see on the left side, found this interesting image online while trying to figure out why this is happening now. In 150 BC, China invented paper. And today, not that much longer, 2006, big planetary companies like Amazon, Google, and so on have created clouds of all kinds, where every piece of information or data that we generate, every byte or bit of it is stored in these clouds. So there's massive data generation, massive investment in technology to improve computing power, new kinds of languages like R and Python that are more functional programming languages that anybody can use without a computer science degree also to produce a lot of good information. And of course, new visualization techniques, new software for visualization techniques, a lot more interest and awareness of design and information design has led us as a society to a point where a lot of this data is useful, but also being used properly to design narratives and stories to talk about what we need to talk about. Of course, this has negative implications with misinformation and disinformation that we all know now, living in COVID in the past 2 years. But it also has a lot of positives. And I think that's why this is being used by various researchers and organizations. Things have also changed on the methodological side, from statistics to machine learning, which is actually just a fancy term that a scientist decided to give to the activity of statistics for large data sets in 1969, I think. Name of the person was Arthur Samuel, did this for IBM, if I'm not mistaken, just to have it as a marketing technique to lure more clients into the business. And what's next? I think recently Google started talking about superintelligence because intelligence is clearly not working. So we have a new concept of superintelligence. I don't know what that will bring, but this is the general progression of using a lot of data to train systems because we have all of this massive infrastructure around it. That's why we are living in this massive data revolution. I think at this point, many people have said this, that between dawn of civilization and 2003, we had only created 5 exabytes of information. And now we are creating that every 2 days. So you see that there's an exponential and maybe even a more steeper progression of things where data is being created, both inadvertently and by choice. Lots of examples of what that data looks like, where it comes from. So transportation systems are movement patterns, geographical data. We have systems like OpenStreetMaps and Google Maps, and more proprietary settings like Here Maps and Nokia Maps and whatnot. Cultural data, where books are being codified into cultural data that people can use now to study a lot of different interesting cultural things about our society. Scientific data, of course, from biology, physics, chemistry. There's also banking data and statistical information, weather patterns, data related to climate change and natural phenomena. And all of these are different forms of data, but most of them look the same way. They are either in formats like CSV files, Excel notebooks, JSON files, which is a specific category of files that are shaped in a certain format, and shape files, which are more geographical data related, that focus on latitude and longitude and tell us where every piece of information is actually located on the world map, right? So there's a lot of different data sources and most of them look the same when you look at the meta information that it has. But data alone is not very valuable for anybody, right? Just having a bunch of data, we as humans are not capable of discerning any information from it. If we look at these spreadsheets, we will never understand anything from it. So data does not lead to action directly. And on the action side, it's just an example of an article that says the impact of urban proximity, transport accessibility, and policy on urban growth, and shows a longitudinal analysis of the Netherlands. Just because some of us are hosting the school in the Netherlands, I thought this would be a nice image to show that a lot of data had gone into understanding how to shape this region of the Netherlands that we live in the Randstad area. I will not go too deeply into this example, but how do you convert data into action? We need methods, tools, and techniques to turn data into actionable knowledge, to understand what's going on in these spreadsheets and how we can extract information that is true, of course, factual and legitimate, and talks about a story that we care about, we want to talk about, to influence policy or influence a different direction, depending on our value systems. So before I move on, I'd like to host a very simple quiz online, and I'd like to ask you a question. So every time I go to different meetings with decision makers, I hear this thing a lot. Let's solve this problem by using big data. None of us have the slightest idea what to do with. And these conversations often lead to nothing. So I would like to ask you, can you think of a real world context where data and statistics are being used to make a difference, and how? Mostly positive differences, but of course, negative differences are also welcome. So please raise your hand or post something in the chat, and I will reiterate it to the audience and discuss it.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the question is what data is being used, right?
Yeah, a real world context where data and statistics are being used to make a difference. So the example could be in this context that I'm familiar with, data is being used to do something with it for poverty or something else. And how is it being used?
Cool. So we have a lot of answers in the chat. Can you see the chat?
Yeah, I'm just opening it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, so a lot of data was used for COVID analysis, studying COVID in different formats. There's so many studies that came out. I think science was overwhelmed by publishing all of these things. But yeah, climate change is another avenue where data is used to understand the patterns of our changing climate. More specifically, something that I'm interested in, to strategize COVID fighting mechanisms. So what kind of pharmacological or non-pharmacological approaches might be used? And then you need data of human behavior, also about the biological components of COVID as well, from a standpoint of developing new medicine. Then there's about climate modeling. A lot of data is used for car accidents to study maybe historically how car accidents affect communities or how they occur and what might be the reason for it, and then trying to mitigate the number of accidents. Data is used for disaster preparedness, maps data for traffic, but also for disaster. It's used to understand poverty. What are the determinants of poverty? How might we mitigate it? Used to understand housing. The housing crisis in the Netherlands is quite big right now. I'm sure it's much bigger in other parts of the world. Educational statistics for traffic planning, bus routes and train routes and the amount of people. Yeah, some of those have already been discussed. Data on sexism to show the gaps in gender or sex in terms of perhaps accessibility to different services. Transit analysis, data on politics, how might people vote and why they're doing that. Refugee data is used also for disaster preparedness, but other things. Waste management, marketing, safety and crime, for water management.
Somebody said something super interesting, that data is being used to track migrants, so to make their, the immigration routes more restrictive. It's quite worrying.
Yeah, definitely. That is really worrisome. Hadn't reached that point yet, but that's, yeah, excellent point to share. Another one is in Colombia, it's used to study illicit crops such as cocaine base to decide how to intervene. It's used on social media. Yeah, somebody also uses it to determine what time was the best to wake my toddler up. Very nice examples. Thank you for sharing, all of you. And you can, of course, go through them yourselves as well in the chat. So let's continue. I just wanted to do this to also understand that we are all seeing or observing data from different aspects. We might see it being used in different environmental contexts or different contexts just around us in space. And we might use it ourselves also for personal things. And the point is that data is everywhere and is being used everywhere. So we also talked a little bit about what we need for turning data into action. And the study of that is perhaps now called famously or infamously data science. It is a bit more than statistics, a bit less than computer science, a bit of mix of the two, where there's lots of computational tools to do programming that is efficient. And that's why we also have functional programming languages to do it more quickly. Also for visualizing things that we want to communicate. Has communication skills as part of it for storytelling, because it's important not just to create an algorithm, but also to understand what the data is telling us and then use it for the purpose. Also has domain expertise behind it. So data scientists can come from biology, from mechanics, from climate change, from transportation, water studies, wherever you talk about, there is data scientists working in the field. Because there are also theories and domain expertise that is important to understand why the data are the way they are and how they can be used to shape the systems that we are talking about in our specific domains of interest. And these are the methods, tools, and techniques that are used to turn data into actionable knowledge. Now, this itself can be a course or a course for 2 or 3 semesters or a degree in itself. And at the end of the class, I will share a link where you could do something like that for free, because it's a course that I teach at TU Delft. It's open source materials. You can go through it step by step over 8 to 10 weeks. Right now, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what that might look like. And when we talk about data and data science, this is a famous example that comes to mind. This is a map designed by Jon Snow. So not the person from Game of Thrones, but a famous epidemiologist from back in the day in 1854. Jon Snow used this map to mark spaces where cases of cholera outbreak were taking place and find out where the pumps were situated from where the water was being used, to actually understand and isolate the problem and the cause and address it. Right. So this also shows that space is very important, because a lot of things are spatial around us. And this is one of the most famous and my favorite examples of using data for in a very simple manner to understand a problem that was very difficult to understand without having a map and without having the data on those cases. So if you're interested, I've posted a link here also that you can search yourself and read more about it. And that brings me to Geo Data Science. So space is important, and a lot of this you will also hear from others in the subsequent sessions. And that leads me to Geo Data Science, which is basically, the point here is that a very large portion of all these new data that we are talking about and that you actually share in the chat are inherently geographic. They have a latitude and a longitude or an XY coordinate that can be traced back to some location over space. And maybe also over time. So spatial is actually very special because it helps us understand the big picture, not just the small picture about a problem, but also how different things might be connected for a certain problem. And some of these methods require an explicitly spatial treatment, and that is a bit more advanced than data science, more focused on geo data science. We will not go through those methods specifically, but you will find them in my course at the end. I want to play this video. I hope that it does work, and it'll be 4 minutes, I think. And I'd like you all to look at what the United States Census is telling us about. I hope you can hear.
It doesn't have sound.
Yeah.
Is there sound, Trivik?
Yeah, there's sound for me.
The census is,
But not for you, right?
Yeah. Now it has sound.
Now we can hear it.
Okay.
the stories within the numbers. The framers of our country embedded the census in the US Constitution and made it a tool of the people.
Thomas Jefferson said, let's count how many people there are in the country and figure out how we're going to divide things up based on that. And we still do that today.
There's nothing as big as the missions that government gives you to do. We have to reach every single person, 300 million plus in the country.
Getting all that basic information, that ends up being a massive amount of data. We're talking about terabytes of data. Our challenge was to get all that data out there in a way that people could use it intuitively. It made sense having an easy-to-use interface that's simple to understand. In the background is Google Maps. On top of it, we've overlaid our own data and these controls that customize it for our needs. You can learn about all different kinds of areas. You can drill down into it, you can interact with it, and the map works fast. To really have a fluid experience, they want it to happen within a tenth of a second.
So we can provide these rich profiles and portraits of the country based on collecting just 10 simple questions from each household. It's our job to share this content with the people who paid for it, the taxpayers, and to make sure that data is in their hands in a simple and visually pleasing way. Working at the Census Bureau, by definition, means you're part of history. You're taking a snapshot of the country that centuries from now, people will be looking back at. And that really is invigorating.
Great. So I hope everybody was able to hear that without any echoes, right? See some nodding faces. That's great. So I call this good old thick data. Actually, I don't. My postdoc, Juliana Gonsalves, she coins such data thick data because it has been collected traditionally through surveys, through other kinds of methods of data collection over a long period of time. This is the US Census data. This is the US Census Bureau sharing this video, talking about how census data is collected and shared with the public. And they have various scales of resolution for this data. But it's only available every 10 years, right? So that's why it's also sort of thick data, because it's very relevant and important, but you can't collect it on a daily basis. But you see that it is spatial in nature, and it can be mapped onto a map to understand, broadly speaking, what the overarching picture of the census might look like in any region in the world. Sorry. So good old data has got positives. It's traditionally data used in the social sciences. It's these kinds of big experiments for data collection are done for a specific purpose, like the census data. Carefully designed, collected for that purpose, detailed in information. So it provides very rich profiles and portraits of, in this case, people and cities and regions, very high quality. But it requires massive enterprises. The US Census Bureau is a huge organization that employs, if not thousands, hundreds of people around the country. Every single person doing such a job or contributing to it is costly, right? And only big countries and wealthy countries like the United States can do that. So it's also not something that is accessible to the rest of the world or as a service or as something that might be useful for them to study their own regions. It's coarse in resolution. To preserve privacy, they need to be aggregated. So it's not about per person, but it's about regions, smaller regions that can be aggregated to give you bigger regions at different scales. And of course, it's slow. The more detailed, the less frequent they are available. Some countries have it 5 years, some countries have it 10 yearly. So it has its pros and cons, but it's still very useful, and it's used in multiple ways in urban sciences or urban planning. Some examples are surveys, census, interviews, indicators that are used and tracked for longer periods of time, like livability and so on. And now, because of the data revolution that we've seen, we also have new sources of big data. So on one side, you have the thick data, which is more traditional. On the other, you have the big data. These are accidental in nature. They're created for different purposes, but available for analysis as a side effect for many of us. For example, Twitter, Jack Dorsey didn't create Twitter for academics to research human behavior. It's just a side effect. And now they've come to a point where they've released a platform where academics can tap into and get all of the Twitter data from the beginning of Twitter's time. They are very diverse in nature, different resolutions, not always the same quality and detail, but potentially detailed in both space and time, because they're generated by big data systems and infrastructure that has the capacity to store all of this information through various devices and means. Quality, of course, also varies greatly, and so does use and misuse of this kind of information by companies that produce it, but also other organizations and people who have access to it. Couple of examples of how these data have been classified in the literature. So Lazar and Radford say there are 3 ways to classify them. They're either digital life data, digital actions like we do on Twitter, Facebook, and Wikipedia. That's our online life. There are also digital traces, record of our digital actions like call detail records. So if you're using your phone and moving around in a city, then leaving a digital trace behind that is stored. And they're also digitalized life. So these are non-intrinsically digital life, but in digital form, like government records, which is nothing to do with our online presence, but are stored in an online format. Another example is by Aribas Bell, where they talk about 3 levels, how data is generated. So they are either generated bottom-up by us as citizens, as sensors, producing information about us or about other phenomena or things. They're also intermediately generated, so by digital businesses or businesses going digital. A lot of, during the internet, when internet became a huge thing around the world, a lot of businesses went online, and that also generated a lot of data. And then it's also top down, where governments store data for a lot of different activities happening in the city. One example in the Netherlands, in The Hague, is the Hague Ciphers, which has indicators of neighborhoods and people and communities for many years, I think around 30 to 40 years in the past. Another example that one of my students shared with me once was this one, Plan, which is an organization that focuses on girl safety. And this platform created a new project, Free to Be, where citizens are generating data from various cities, Delhi, Kampala, Lima, Madrid, Sydney, and marking on the maps where people feel safe or unsafe, just to understand the big picture of where in a city communities, especially of non-male communities, are feeling safe or unsafe in various parts of these cities. So this was an example where data was used for some good. I hear some echo. I think someone's got their microphone on. Please, if you can mute yourself, that would be very helpful. Thank you. So that was it about data, kind of like a crash discussion about data, different kinds of data, different sources, the big data revolution and the geo data revolution. So what can we use this data for? A couple of things that I am interested in to study, and generally what this course talks about, a few global urban challenges like climate change and so on. So this image, although it's beautiful imagery, it's quite tragic, that shows urban inequalities across many different spaces around the world, especially in the global south, but also in some Western regions. These are photographs by Johnny Miller, a Nat Geo photographer, documenting urban inequalities from space around the world. And if we talk about urban inequalities, we know that 50% of the world's population, as Roberto has already pointed out, I think last session, is moving. It has already moved to urban areas, and about 2050, we expect 80% of the population living in urban areas. And many urban areas are looking like this, where communities are divided along social and spatial lines. We'll have rising seas, forced displacement and migration of people. We already live in economic inefficiencies. We're dependent on consumption. So more of these spaces will be built. And as a result, there's a lot of pressure on these urban spaces. So there's growing energy demand. And you can imagine that urban inequalities are going to further exacerbate in the future instead of reducing in the current climate that we are heading towards. And this is not just imagery. We've done some analysis in our lab where every city that we look at around the world, these are some that I could pull up quickly. It shows here the curves are basically accessibility to different resources in every city. And you see the distribution of that accessibility is kind of a skewed normal curve. But what it suggests is that many people in the city have low to medium accessibility, and very few people have high accessibility. The yellow parts are regions where people have high accessibility, and the darker parts are regions where people have low accessibility. And this is true for most cities around the world. We tested 54. And what you see in these curves are, again, this is the curve that you saw previously, but there are two kinds of communities that arise from this. So who has high accessibility are very high income people, low ratio of visible minorities, they have high education, and they pay high rent because they can. And the ones who are in the yellow curve here, the most, where the median is shifted to the left, those people who have lower accessibility, they also have low income, high ratio of visible minorities, low education, and high unemployment among those communities. So inequalities exist in real manifestation of accessing resources around their living spaces. And most often it's the same communities that are suffering and struggling. And these are going to further exacerbate if things don't change. So urban inequalities are manifesting in space, and why they're manifesting, I don't want to talk about that or conjecture on that. There are many different reasons, but access and opportunities are an important factor in trying to reduce them. So a lot of scholars agree that bringing more access and opportunities to communities who are struggling is imperative in improving their livelihood and providing them upward mobility of any kind in life. And it's imperative in trying to get better levels of education, more social community or social resilience, access to healthy lifestyles, better options for food, and also healthcare. And once communities have that, we could start thinking about addressing inequalities and improving their livelihoods. So there are disparities in access, and most of them are manifesting in space. It's possible to see them, it's possible to study them, and then we know how to bring more comfort or improve those inequalities through access and opportunities for people. And that leads me to the smart city experiment. Because a lot of the urban challenges, the answer to that has been by municipal governments around the world to focus on making their systems and their spaces smart, and thinking about the smart city agenda, promising smartness everywhere to try and improve or address a lot of the urban challenges that we faced or have been facing. And the smart city imaginary looks something like this. So I found this image. Credit goes to KSB Pumps. They're, I think, a company that designs water systems, but it fit in what I wanted to actually say. On the left side, you can see the smart city imaginary focuses on everything has to be connected or super connected and intelligent. You have your energy systems, you have your airports, you have your land use, your pipelines for everything that is super well connected with transport and land use. And all of that feeds into the center of this image where you have this high-rise city where only a select few have access to all of these resources. But on the right side of the image, you see that a lot of people don't have access to any of these resources. And that's kind of the metaphor that I got from this image, is that as we are moving towards this smart reality and the smart city imaginary, a lot of the communities are being left behind. So this begs a question. We are designing smarter cities and thinking about smart mobility, energy, healthcare, and all of that. But who are we doing that for? Who gets to access those? And who is left behind? So the smart city experiment is a complex one, but I think it focuses around this triangle of power, technology, and capital. There are only a few companies in the world that have the resources and infrastructure to market those technologies that are necessary for smart cities. And I think it's a way of wielding power over communities, over cities, to try and claim space and use that as an experimental setup. All of that technology and power comes with capital, or capital is necessary for it. So smart city experiments are a way of urbanizing the capital or reinventing areas by focusing on capital and not on communal well-being of people or on the real problems that people face. So this amazing paper by Jathan Sadowski called The Cyberspace and Cityscapes on the Emergence of Platform Urbanism focuses on a framework to understand the smart city experiment and understand the dynamics, the power, technology, capital dynamics of the smart city experiment around the world. It has three key elements: oversight, operation, and ownership. Oversight focuses on the fact that a city is outsourced, or the oversight of the city is outsourced to tech companies like IBM and Cisco. Operation focuses on taking control over the operation of services that are essential to the functioning of urban life. And ownership focuses on the technology capital being owned by these companies. So spaces that we use are now not public or government focused, but are owned by companies that buy these spaces to try and transform areas with the idea that they want to focus on communal well-being. So I want to give a few more pointers about this because this will be used in the exercise later on. These three can be looked on as stages of a smart city experiment, according to Jathan Sadowski. The first one is oversight of city governance. So the idea here is making the city an entrepreneurial testbed, using tech to make cities more efficient or promising that it will be more efficient, convenient, and livable for people. And these technologies haven't been developed with these problems in mind, right? They existed at the same time the problems existed. And then was sort of a way to market these technologies to then support governments in addressing problems that might never get addressed because of those technologies. I think it started with the examples of IBM and Cisco, who intervened in a lot of cities around the world, I think in the 1980s or so on, act like consultants who redirect and guide urban governance. And this kind of dominant imaginary basically exists still today, even though it doesn't work, because you've already invested in infrastructure, so that cannot be turned around. Like we can't really just destroy roads at the whim of some governments. The second stage of this experiment is the operation of city services. So transforming our social interactions by placing platforms that we use between us and services that we need. Examples are Uber and Airbnb, for instance, that come and restructure existing practices of the governance that is happening in cities, facilitate processes of value creation that don't necessarily focus on value for citizens or communities, and reorganize conditions of labor and markets for a lot of workers who get sucked into these businesses. Finally, the third one is about ownership of city space. So there is governance and services, but now we are actually seeing companies own city space, like Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, in Canada. So these planetary platforms also own space. The focus on economically struggling municipalities that are dealing with a lot of decay and deprivation. And a neighborhood, what they focus on is, let's transform a neighborhood to an innovation lab where we can do whatever we want, right? So those are the three key elements of this framework that is very useful in understanding different kinds of smart city experiments and seeing whether they work or not. And I think what's important is to understand how that situates with urban governance. So governance is, in many cities, disintegrated because there are complex priorities among different stakeholders who are trying to address them without necessarily working together. It's also focused on utility or utilitarian policies where solutions are tailored to the whole region or city without thinking about the underlying disparities within communities. And finally, I think it's focused on neoliberalism, where attracting investments is very important for city governments to attract more white-collar workers who are highly educated and who want to consume more amenities. So focusing and connecting back to the urban inequalities debate, where access is segregated to only a specific select few people. And all of this because cities are complex. Cities are very complex structures, problems of organized complexity. I'm sure you're familiar with Jane Jacobs' work. And she details this very eloquently that cities basically are problems of organized complexity, where we are dealing simultaneously with many factors which are interrelated, but can also be studied as a whole. So on the left, you see a figure by Sarah Miro, where she defines urban resilience in these 4 layers. It's similar to what we are doing here today. We have an infrastructure layer among us for our conversation. We have the Zoom network and email and whatnot where we can talk. We have flows. We are flowing information back and forth to each other. And we have a governing network that is organized by Roberto and Caroline and others, in which we are situated and having this conversation. And there are different socioeconomic dynamics that are arising as a result of that, right? Some of us have difficulties in accessing internet from where we are. Some of us don't have access to these planetary companies like Zoom or their software to work as we want to. So there are these different socioeconomic dynamics of equity and justice also arising in this small example. So you can imagine on cities scale or that level, there are very different complex processes going on. And because of these complexities, it's very important to think about the smart city experiment as a whole and not just focused on a few communities. And at the risk of being reductionist, I think the smart city experiment has failed. There's also a lot of evidence for this in literature and also anecdotal evidence around the world. But I just wanted to share how it might have failed and what are the key aspects that we should focus on. And now I want to share quickly in a couple of slides before we move on to a break, what is the alternative that I'm proposing? And many people have proposed before me. So urban science and policy is the study where we can study the fundamental processes that shape urban spaces and it's a very transdisciplinary field of research, because you can't do this alone as a physicist or a computer scientist. You need all kinds of knowledge coming together. Why this can happen is, like Jane Jacobs said, cities are problems of organized complexity. If you look on the left, if you map cities on this graph, on the horizontal axis, you have the population size of a city. On the vertical axis, you have urban indicators of various kinds, like innovation, energy consumption, crime, disease, infrastructure, etc. And these have typical patterns of arrangement in cities depending on the population size. Right? So this complexity can be studied through traditional methods of complexity science or longitudinal analysis of data from many decades. But also now we have new data, new big data and thick data that we can combine with data science methods to study this more deeply. So this field is really emerging. A lot of people work on this study these days, which is great, because we need a lot of different disciplines to try and understand the cityscapes or urban spaces together to address the real problems of inequality and climate change and other big challenges that we face today. So urban science and policy, as many colleagues share this notion, should be focusing on an integrated systems theory of urbanization, where we can essentially focus on providing more socially resilient communities, sustainable infrastructure for energy, for transport, better forms of economic systems that are decoupled from consumption patterns, and so on. And I think this can be done not just with data and data science methods and a transdisciplinary field of work, but also by rejecting the smart city imperative and thinking more about how we can study the real needs of people, how we can analyze the real problems that people are facing, communities are facing, and use data for the good by researchers, by communities, by citizens, and so on. So that's it for my talk. I think after the break, I would look at Roberto to see how long we have a break for. And then after the break, we can dive into an exercise where you just don't have to listen to me rambling on, but you can also do something together with your peers.
Thank you so much, Trivik. That was excellent. And I fully support the idea that we actually need to reject the idea of of the smart city and focus on citizens. I have worked with policymakers, and it's really heartbreaking when I hear a policymaker talking about the smart city without really understanding what it means, as if making cities smart would be a solution for all problems. And I think that's really not the case in most cities, I have to say. Shruti is saying we need smart citizens, and I do agree. Kutlo, I'm sorry if all the numbers are giving you a headache. We are, unfortunately, the Delft University of Technology, so we need to focus a little bit on technology. But I think, as you can see, we have a quite a critical approach to technology, linking it to societal problems, right? I just want to highlight one thing. So I put the link for the Sub-Saharan Africa Excellence Scholarships that are available for Sub-Saharan African students in the chat. And I am putting again here the form that where you can register your presence in this session, right? We are checking the presence of everyone. So you can put your name in that form. Let me have a look at the clock. We will have can we have a small break until 7:32, more or less? So 5 minutes, is that fine? So we will have a small break. It's called a comfort break. So we can all have a glass of water, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Please register your presence. Otherwise, we cannot. We don't know that you are here, right? And I just put the link in the chat. See you in 5 minutes. See you, Trivik, in 5 minutes.
Hi, Rocco. Are you there?
I am here, yes.
Okay, where is this echoing?
Yes, it's not coming from me.
Okay, it should be fine right now.
Okay.
So I need to leave, actually, especially for today. And I
That's
will
all
be...
right. If you just put your name in the list, we will know you were here for the first part.
Yes, exactly. And then I can rewatch it from YouTube again, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
I will send the link later on.
Thank you so
All right?
much, and for the great lecture. See you
Okay.
next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Roberto,
Yes.
will you make the breakout groups?
Yes. How many people would you like?
About 6 at most.
Okay, I think we can make, let me see. We have 140 people. It's always kind of normal that a few people leave. So we'll have around 28 breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's great.
I am going to, if people are okay, I'm going to close the, because we are starting to have more people in the list of responses of the presence list than there were in the chat. So that's a little bit.
Yeah.
So now it's closed, guys.
Trivik, you also got a couple of questions in the chat. Do you have time to take those, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
Abdelrahman, I think it was quite a while back, but you asked a question about capital and who's the beneficiary of capital, the service providers or others?
Okay.
And then there was a bit of discussion that continued at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when it comes to smart cities, the capital is invested into the business itself. So when a company puts itself between us as communities and us and the services that we might need, the capital is used to create that service for us, but then inadvertently, I think it gets absorbed by the business for wealth creation and value creation. My personal example is with Uber recently. So my personal situation is that I live between two places, two countries. And now that I've seen 4 in the recent past, I've seen Uber declining rapidly in all of these places. The service is subpar. There's, of course, a huge problem with the labor markets, and people who actually drive the cars are struggling as well. So all of that capital was used to create such a big mammoth, which doesn't provide what we need as a service. Takes a lot in terms of money from the laborers itself, and companies declining now. So it's not for the beneficiaries, I think, if you mean beneficiaries as communities, but it's for the service providers itself.
Well, I started a parallel discussion in the chat about the democracy of data collection, right? Good data collection, having good data collection, having a census is part of having a good democracy, because then decisions can be taken based on facts and not on, imagination of politicians. And it's very important that we believe in fact, believe in science, and having good data is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Data collection is great.
I just added a link to the Resilience Academy Tanzania. I think they're quite a nice example of a community of practice where scientists are training students to go and with the tools to collect data locally themselves. And they have massive repository and data sets of mapping basically all kinds of issues in Tanzania. So you can follow that link and find not only their trainings, but also their data sets, which are open source, and you can access them freely.
Sorry, may I ask a question?
Yes, Edgar, go on.
It's interesting that you just mentioned Tanzania, because that's where I'm originally from. And I put a point saying in at least in Tanzania, it's less about factual data, that it's more about who delivers the factual data, right? So although Roberto is a researcher and he has done this research democratically and he's given us the facts, if I think Roberto is affiliated with political party A and I do not favor political party A, I immediately attach his findings with that party and say he is pushing that agenda. So even with the research, like with the urban lab that I work with in Tanzania, like with the research and data works perfect when you're discussing it with other researchers, other academics. You know, you have the African Urban Research Initiative. When you go to all those areas, it's great. When you move into people, like I remember we were at an informal settlement and we were collecting data, and one of the ladies said, "Oh, so what are you guys doing?" Like, "Oh, we're doing research." And then what you're going to do is like, "Oh, we're going to get this data." And then what are you going to do? And we said, "Oh, we're going to give it to the government." And she was like, she literally scoffed and was like, "Well, that's
of course,
that's nothing, you know."
So Edgar, we know that happens, and people living in slums are rightfully suspicious, right? Because they have seen many times their data collected and used or misused. But about the first topic you raised, indeed, I think if I told you, okay, I belong to party A, and this is the data that I'm producing, so you would be a bit suspicious. But there is such a thing as academic integrity, right? So in academic integrity, you try to be as free of bias as possible. Of course, it's impossible to be totally free of bias, but a normal, good census should produce data that is factual and not political, right? So I know I'm talking about things that maybe don't happen all the time in reality, but in a few countries, I would say that the data produced is not political. It's just the data that there is, right? And there are more and more ways to collect data independently also. So I think we have to. Hi, Rituraj. I closed the form, right? Because I'm starting to see. I will open it again very quickly, but it's open now. I'm starting to see more responses in the form than there are people in the room. So you can register your presence. Okay, let's go back, right? Trivik, the floor is yours. Can you explain what we want us to do?
Yes, I will quickly go over it. So we have a small discussion exercise, and it goes as follows. So I will ask you some questions, like imagine your employer asks you to do something. And there are 6 questions that you will see. Afterwards, we will create breakout rooms where 6 of you will work together on this. And in your breakout rooms, you will first select a question out of the 6 that are given on the slides. Then I'd like you to deliberate individually on that question and answer the questions using one of 5 options, A, B, C, D, and E. The options will come in just a second. What you should do next is assign a moderator in the room. So I expect that you will voluntarily organize yourselves among the 6 and one person will take the lead and discuss, and the moderator will help everyone discuss the answers together using the framework of oversight, operation, and ownership that we studied just before on the Smart City experiment, and report conclusions in the main room when we come together after the activity. So there are a few rules that I'd like to suggest to follow. That first, there is no right answer out of A, B, C, D, and E. Everyone would probably choose an answer depending on their personal situation and their value system and so on. So please debate, but respectfully. and be respectful of all the options that people choose. Try and understand why. And if you don't want to answer, that's also okay. All right, so you will have the slide available later on to you. The options are these 5. You can answer the questions in the same manner always. You are either quite happy to do that, you are reluctant but would still do it, you would object to doing it and ask for alternative tasks, but do it if you must. You would resign from your job rather than doing it, or resign from the job and launch a public protest campaign against what has been asked for or the company. So to get a hang of the questions and all of this information in a quick presentation, you can either scan this barcode or you can use the link above, shorturl.at/AQW8. And both will take you to the same place where you will have these couple of slides, but also the point about the 3 perspectives on the smart city, which are basically...
I'll write really quickly the link in the short URL.at/AQWN8.
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote it wrong. Sorry, guys.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Roberto. My name is Michelle from Uganda, and it's quite late here. I really need to go because it's an early day tomorrow, but I don't know if that's all right. I'll follow
That's
up
fine.
with that.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as you put your name in the list, we know you were here. Okay.
Oh, great. But thank you so much for this. It was really wonderful because I've been doing research in big data. So this has been very insightful.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. See you.
Excited for the next class. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Trivik, should I create they have to go to this website and then they have to discuss in their groups, right? I'm going to create the groups right now.
Yeah, so everything's available on these slides on this website, and then please take the next, I'd say, 12 minutes, Roberto?
Yeah.
To do it, and then we will come back together in the main room, and hopefully some of you might want to discuss your conclusions or insights from that exercise.
So guys, whoever is here in the room, you need to accept the invitation to get into the... I'm trying to do everything at the same time. Yeah, most of them have joined. There are 27 rooms. It will be funny. There are 4 people who have not been assigned to a room. I'm going to assign you guys right now.
I see Inchi here, I think has some problems with his connectivity and needs an explanation again.
Yes, I'm so sorry I couldn't hear the explanation, and I'm afraid now that I won't catch up in the room to discuss it with the others.
So you'll have to, well, Trivik, do you want to say something? Is Trivik here?
Yeah, so if you just click on this link that Roberto has posted in the chat, or scan this barcode, you will get to the explanation, and everyone will probably still be talking about which question to select to discuss. So it's okay to join a room.
Okay, thank you. I'm doing it now. So can you send me again my room invitation, maybe?
We can't, dear. What room were you before?
I wasn't in a room. I'm so sorry to cause.
We sent the. It should. it should be, you should have you should have somewhere to click that takes you to the room. You should have received it, right?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Let me see if I can find you.
There are also,
sorry. Did you find her?
no, but there are about 20 other people still in this room.
Yeah, I don't know. They should have received a little button. If they click it, they can join. So the only person I see here that is not joined, yes. Rituraj has not joined. Sarah not joined. Room 13. Yeah, now we have to go group by group to see. Jonathan not joined. So Nurum, yeah.
I still have connection problems, so maybe I can just leave for now and don't cause further problems.
We are trying to find in which room you are. If you give us 1 minute.
Okay.
When we divide the rooms, you should automatically, yeah. I think I found you. You are in room 24. Just a second.
Thank you.
Did you receive something now?
Yes, I saw it now. I'm joining.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
I'm just moving them around when they didn't join. Carissa, I'm amazed that you're here. I mean, you have kids.
Oh, I'm always curious to hear what Trivik is doing, and I'm always trying to connect more to the data scientists. So anything for you, Trivik. No, it's
Thank you. It's really nice.
There's so much overlap too. So I'm sure someday we're gonna find something to work on together.
Well, I hope we didn't. Nurum, are you there? Did you find your room? Oh. I hope we didn't shock them too much with our critique to the smart city. Because I think for students, it's quite like people are always talking about the smart city, and then we say, don't do that, don't pay attention.
I'm so annoyed that this term is still being used in the wrong ways. It was a decade ago, I was at a mobility conference in Germany, and it was just all about smart mobility. And all they wanted to talk about was, these big manufacturers teaming up with other countries to build new railways and build, this and this. And it was all just, not my definition of smart. It was really like neocolonialism.
Exactly.
So yeah, but here we are still.
Well, we are still live on YouTube, guys. So, well, I think we are